My name is Sarah Brown. I am 17 years old.
Nice to be here, Sarah. Well, we couldn't have a better day. Oh, well, the reason my parents moved here, this was the first house that they actually owned. They were renting places beforehand, and originally, when I was just a baby, they were renting a home on Goodrich Avenue on the other side of the railroad tracks, and so they were familiar with St. Luke's Church, and that's where we belonged and everything. And then after that, they moved out more to by Hamlin and Englewood Avenue. And so this was the very first house that they bought, and it was a small house. My parents, we did not have money. We couldn't be buying the homes on the other side of the alley, so to speak. This was a two-bedroom bungalow, and it was unfinished attic and everything. And the main reason they bought this home was because, first of all, it was close. Well, in those days, 1940, it was streetcars. We were close to St. Clair with the streetcar line and Grand Avenue. And then also Linwood School was right up here, 4 or 5 doors away. And then our church, St. Luke's on Lexington and Summit, and then Central High School, which is a mile away. And so that was the main reason that they bought that home. There was no inclination with playing tennis or anything. First of all, these are very prominent people that belonged here, and there'd be no way that my parents even had any idea what type of club it was, and we could not have been part of this club. So tennis really had no bearing the tennis courts. But I always thought too, as I moved from that home, I thought if we had not moved there, if we'd even moved across the alley, probably I wouldn't be playing tennis. Well, I think my whole life really goes back to the way I was brought up. The women were not working at that time, so my mother was a full-time homemaker. And the nice thing, and this might be hard to believe, but my mother really never came up here to watch us play tennis, never. In fact, the first time that my mother saw me play tennis was when I think I was 16, and we went out went to the girls' nationals, and we drove out. My brother was old enough we could drive out there. And that was fine because I always knew I could go home and we'd have clean clothes. We'd have 3 meals a day, morning, noon, and night. And my mother was a homemaker, a real homemaker, and she liked to garden also. But I think that's the main thing, is that we had a good, stable home. And right from the beginning, we knew what was right and wrong. My mother would get up. Well, we had three children. My brother is 10 years younger than I am. My sister's 2.5 years older. And she'd be up every morning, and my dad would go to work. He worked at the highway department, which is on University, where the Midway Target is. And my mother would be up. She'd make breakfast for us. We didn't have to fool around with anything. And when we went to Linwood School, we'd come home for lunch because that's what the kids did. There was no busing and so on and so forth. And we always ate dinner together. So we really ate 3 meals, except my dad was working. And I think that's important too. Even like I'd be playing tennis up here like around 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock, some of the fellows would come up and they'd see me sitting around and they hit balls. And even if we were playing, I knew I had to be home at 5:15. And if I wasn't, my dad, I don't know how fellows whistle through their teeth. I mean, I could hear the whistle, and I knew I was late, and I just would come home. So we always ate together. And I think, I just was brought up the right way. And and as I was growing up and playing tennis and so on, first of all, you're representing yourself and your family, but then it came to you're representing your school, your job, the people. Minnesota, I represented my city, state, and country, and I never gave it a thought because I knew what was right and wrong, and I took care of myself, and I don't think I made a fool of myself on or off the court. I know I didn't. It was altogether different. Now you have to remember, this is the war years and everything during the World War, and parents just did not fall. A few parents brought their kids to the tournaments and that, but nowadays, I mean, everybody goes from grandparents all the way down, aunts, uncles, and so on and so forth. And I sort of question that sometimes. There's just too much of that, and I've noticed that too sometimes. Well, where I live now, it's all seniors and grandmas and that, and they become rather critical. I think the best thing is when you're raising children nowadays, too often the parents are, because the parents play tennis or the parents do this, and they want their kids to do that. And see, my dad played a little bit, but nothing to talk about or anything. And we just did it because this Louis Sukup allowed us to come in. That's how we got started. And you know, everybody would like their child probably be that one in a million where you're going to make millions of dollars. Well, that's not going to happen all that often. And I think there's too much pressure. Like when I see now, you see it on TV and that, where little kids are learning how to skate. They're about this tall. The skating is incidental. They all have their hockey equipment on, boys and girls. I mean, you're sort of forcing your children. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think first of all, just let them learn how to skate. Maybe teaching them on your own. Same with playing ball and what have you. I mean, these little tykes playing t-ball and they don't know where they are. They're looking this way or that way. And just even if parents, mothers or dads, would go out and just play catch once in a while and do things that way. And I know you have to have interest, show interest in sports, but I think a lot of times it appears to me that kids do it because their parents are, quote, more or less forcing them to. And then you see when they get to be 14, 15 years old, and I was the athletic director at Kennedy High School for a few years, the girls and that. When they get to be that age, sometimes they've had enough of it, and then the kids quit, and the parents are all upset, and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a fine line there. I mean, sure, parents have to show interest and want their kids to do this or that, but it's too much what the parents want, and I wonder how often the kids really want to do that. And I've seen when my little grandnephew was playing basketball in the Tivy seventh grade, one boy would play basketball. They'd have a game like 3 in the afternoon, 4 o'clock. He'd go in the locker room, put on his hockey gear, and the mother would whisk him out. I mean, to me, that's a little much. You know, when do they eat? When do they do anything? I mean, there's a fine line, and I hope parents sort of realize maybe what's going on. My favorite memory, I guess, is that I never was forced to do anything as far as playing, and so we had rules at home and everything, but we were happy, and there were kids up here that you could play with, and after we'd come and play up here, my sister and I, well, Louis Suka would say, well, come on up after the courts are lined, and we'd hit balls. Well, my sister was a little bit older than I was, and that wouldn't last too long when you're playing with a sister, and I was the little one, you know, and chasing balls, and then she'd like to go home and play with her dolls. Well, a lot of times the boys right out here in the alley, there's some boys that lived out here, and they had a basketball hoop, and I might go down, and pretty soon they would include me to, you know, just play with them, and after that we'd go up to Linwood School playground here and play softball. There might only be 8 of us, but we'd make up some game, and so we're just doing fun things, and there were kids in the neighborhood, and so we just had a good time. Nothing was forced that we had to do this or that. And then we come up here to the tennis club. I would like, and my sister did a little bit too, like in the morning when Louis saw that we could, and the women that would come up here 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning to play, and when he first told us we could come in and play and use the practice court, then when I was about 9 or 10, I suppose, they could see that my sister and I could play as well as the women, you know. And so then they would include, sometimes a woman wouldn't show up, so they'd have one of us substitute, but then pretty soon we could play as a team, my sister and I. And when I look back, I really learned a lot from those women, and sometimes I know they said, oh yeah, we remember playing, you're just a little kid and so on and so forth. But I don't think they've realized how much that taught us as playing. I mean, I learned doubles. That's where I learned doubles. In fact, there was one member up here, and she played with another member who was from the White Bear Yacht Club, and they'd come up, and the other member had arthritis at that age. And my sister and I suppose we're mean little kids or whatever, but we used to drop shot him and then lob. Well, that was a good technique, really. And finally, the one that belonged to her, she said, girls, if you're going to do that, she said, we just can't play with you anymore because that's not fun. And when I look back, I mean, that's where I didn't play a lobbing game, but it did help when I played doubles. I had a good lob and drop shot, so a lot of those women, they didn't realize it. And as I got older and I would run into a few, I would mention how much they helped and so on. I guess my biggest regret looking back is that now you wish that you could have just told them outright. And like the one woman up here, Marguerite Davis, they called her Muggsy. She was really helped all of us. She gave us our first rackets. Well, besides that dime store racket, and then she would include us playing and what have you. And then she worked for a travel agency, the Davis Travel Agency, and she lived down on Fairmont there. Her father was a doctor, I believe. And then she also promoted for the Northwest patrons, giving money and so on and so forth. And I have one little story too. I think it's in a later question here. When I came back after winning the U.S. doubles in 1958, and she was down at the train depot to meet us and everything too, and she said I had to go to school in a few days after I got back, and it was very hot. And she said, Jean, now tomorrow, she said, you come up here to the tennis club about 4 o'clock, and she said, we'll go down to the last court here, and she said, I want you to play as hard as you did in the singles and the doubles. Well, and so anyway, she showed up and I showed up, and we came down to the fourth court, and we just played one set, and I beat her 6-love. If I had given her a game, she would have been mad, and so it didn't take very long. And then we sat down by the club up there, and she wanted to know my whole summer. That was the year too I got to the semifinals of the singles, and she was as happy as a lark. But she was probably the person up here who influenced my tennis the most. I mean, making sure that we had our rackets, a travel schedule. We were included playing with her. A lot of times she'd play singles with me, and so on and so forth. And then every summer too, she'd take my sister and me out to the White Bear Yacht Club with another woman once during the summer. Of course, we all dressed up. In those days, everybody dressed up all the time. And then we'd go out and we'd play a couple sets of tennis. And then she would always want to go swimming. None of us swam. And she wouldn't swim in the pool. She'd go to the end of the dock and jumped in. And none of us knew how to swim. And then we'd have that, and then we'd have a nice dinner out there. And we looked forward to that every year. And she drove a great big Packard convertible. But probably of all the people, probably I would say she influenced my tennis the most. And I always regret, because she was quite old, and then I never really had a chance. I mean, I thanked her all the time but after, it would have been nice if I had known that she was ill, or all of a sudden I saw her obituary in the paper and she was elderly. But I would have liked to have told her in her later years, really, that she was the most influential. And that's why now, when all of you kids or people are young, it's nice to tell your teachers, but as you get older too and you look back, then you can also go back, and there are favorite teachers, there's favorite people, and just let them know what they did for you. And at the time, you don't know right now, but when you get 40, 50 years old, you'll know.
So from 1948 to 52, you attended Central High School, and then 52 to 56 was St. Catherine University, and neither schools offered girls interscholastic tennis, yet you went on to achieve at a world-class level. Do you think your story would be possible today?
Probably not. When I went to Central, I remember what the tennis coach would have liked my sister and I to play on the boys' team, and he checked into it. Looking back at that time as a young girls, it would have been fun. But now, at my age and looking back, it would not have been the right thing to do, because I think you don't want to be the best girl on a boys' team. That doesn't make any sense, and there'd be no point to it. And then when I went to St. Catherine's, well, there was no interscholastic sports all over the whole country. Although my 3 years at St. Kate's, down in St. Louis, Missouri, a lady named Mrs. Lewis started what they called the College Girls Tennis Tournament. And they invited a number of girls from different colleges. And St. Kate's did pay, I think they gave me $50 for train fare. So when I was a sophomore, junior, and senior, I was runner-up in the singles 3 times down there. And then I played with different doubles partners, and we won the doubles down there 3 times. But they're just, St. Catherine's, like I said, I went to public schools all before, and I had a wonderful education at Linwood and Central, because the teachers weren't right out of college, and you had to sort of work your way to get in. Excellent education. And I went to St. Kate's when my sister went there first. I think neither of us wanted to go to the university. It was so big and so on and so forth. And I had an excellent education there. It prepared me for my teaching career. I was well prepared.
What were some first principles or philosophies that guided your professional work on behalf of school children?
Well, as you know, I taught physical education for 20 years. That's what I majored in. It was fine. And I knew I didn't want to teach Phi until I was 80. And so I always was interested in psychology, sociology. So I went to St. Thomas and got my master's in counseling. And I think the main thing when I was a counselor, I had to look at people as individuals. Every student is different, and the other thing too, you have to know more or less where they're coming from and why sometimes their behavior is this or that. And I would try to instill in the kids that I was counseling that everybody has gifts or talents. I mean, so maybe I could beat everybody in tennis, but if you had a group of kids out in front of me, I'd say, how many of you can swim? They'd raise their hand. I wouldn't be raising my hand. Or how many of you can play the piano or some musical instrument? Half of them. So everybody has a talent, no matter if you're the top one in your class or the lowest one. Somebody can do something better than you. And I guess I would always try to instill that into kids, that we all have talents. You just have to find them. And unfortunately, sometimes people never find them. And like I said, maybe if I had lived over a couple blocks, tennis would not have been my talent. It would have been there, but I would never have known that. And then too, when I was teaching, you have to look at where kids are coming from, their home situation and their behavior and that. And I'm more or less a direct person when I talk to students. I don't like to listen to a lot of before they get to the real problem. Or I sometimes when kids were girls, they were like 15, 16 years old, and they'd be getting into fights or getting into a hassle with another girl. Well, back in second grade, well, I mean, you're a junior in high school now, move on. And that's what you sort of have to instill in them. And you also have to let them know some behaviors are not acceptable, and sometimes they need extra help above and beyond what a counselor could give them. And nowadays they do have social workers and alcohol, chemical dependency counselor. There's lots of different facets, but you have to look at each individual and see where they're coming from. A lot of kids, as you well know, it looks okay on the outside, but when you get back to their homes, it's shambles.
I like this question a lot. If you had a top 5 highlight reel of your life, what would be some of those most memorable moments?
Well, I had to think about that, and first of all, I'm always thankful for my home and where I grew up in the neighborhood and everything like that. I'm also grateful for all of the people who have helped me, from teachers and friends and so on and so forth. And when it comes to tennis, when I look back, and before I got ready for this, I was sort of looking through some things that I haven't looked at for years, it seems like. And sometimes I forgot that I had done this or that, but looking back with tennis, first of all, here just in Minnesota, it turned out that my sister and I pretty well dominated the juniors and even the women. And some fellow had written a letter, and I didn't quite realize that. He said, but basically from the time I was 14, I didn't lose to anybody, including my sister. I didn't lose to any women here, no matter what, for forever. I just didn't. And I guess I didn't realize that. I mean, I know the last one I ever lost to, I think, was my sister. And I shouldn't even tell this, but one time we were in the 15 and under and 18 and under in the women's over at the Aquatennial. Well, it's not much fun to play your sister even once. And so anyway, we sort of decided, well, I would win the 15 and she the 18, and then we played the women's for real. But it's never fun to play your sibling. And so then going back to the highlights, okay, after that was when in 13, when the first time we were able to go to the girls' nationals at Philadelphia. And we didn't have a team. All the other sections had like 5 or 6 girls, and they played like a junior Whiteman team, like the Northwest would play the New York team and so on. But my sister and I, there was nobody else to send. And looking back, my first year there when I was 13 years old, and I don't even ask me why, but this Mary Hardwick Hare, who was with Will Wilson Sportings, and she was a women's champion in England, and she and her husband had come over right before the war, and Charlie did become a citizen, and he was the vice president at Wilson Sporting Goods for a while, and then he quit that and he became a stockbroker and so on. And for some reason, Mary took a liking to us and to me, and she would always, the very first time, there was a picture of me that I brought along, she would hit balls with me and give me pointers, and don't even ask me why. I mean, I didn't stand out. I was quiet, but that's how it all got started with her. And they became my lifelong friends. When I was playing, they made sure when I hadn't played in the women's. Took a year off, a couple of years off when I was in college. I was still in the juniors there, and they got me into the Eastern tournaments because you just couldn't get in because of what you had done before or anything, because it was limited. The men and women played at the same venues, and you played singles, doubles, and mixed doubles, and they became lifelong friends to me. And then Charlie became a stockbroker, and he got me all involved in that. I remember bought a couple. I had no money, but bought a couple shares of this or that, and so they just took care of me, and all the time. And when I went back to England in 1989, it wasn't to go back to Wimbledon, but they were getting up in years and so on, and they had a big home in the south of Wimbledon, and then they had a home at Wimbledon. And I basically, well, they invited me a number of times to come back and visit, because they had gone back to England probably 10 years or so before. And so that's the only reason I went back, and I stayed with them down at their home for two weeks. And Don Budge and his wife, Don Budge was the first major, the major term was Grand Slam. And it was interesting to listen to him and everything too. And then we went up to Wimbledon, and I stayed at a hotel up there, but they were right there and everything. And then when I went back in '89, that's the main reason. I just stayed 4 days up at Wimbledon because I wasn't that interested in watching. And it was, I knew I wouldn't see them again because they were that much older and everything. And when I was looking through some of this the other day, I thought, I wish, and I don't know why I didn't, I wish I would have asked them right then and there, why did you take such an interest in me from Minnesota with nothing, and you had all these other girls with a lot more potential. I don't know why, and I wish I would have been smart enough to ask, but so anyway, playing those 6 years from 13 to 18 at the U.S. Girls, I lost in the first round when I was 13 to an 18-year-old girl from Chicago, and my sister and I got to the quarterfinals in the doubles our first year there. I was 13 and she was 15, and I do remember that match. We lost to two girls, I think they were from Michigan, and we were ahead like 5-2 in the third set, but we lost it. And from that time on, I always got to the quarterfinals or semifinals in the singles, and I never lost to anybody seated below me at that tournament. And my sister and I got to the doubles finals when she was 18 and I was 16, and we lost to Maureen Conley, who at that time was the best player. And then my last year there, I played with a girl from Pennsylvania, from Philadelphia, doubles, and we got to the finals that year too. And then during that time, I was awarded that United States Girls Sportsmanship Award. And there were three of us. Well, that's Marianne Eilenberger from California, who I lost to the last 2 years in the semifinals. And then Gwyneth Johnson, my doubles partner. And I didn't give much thought because, well, I thought Marianne probably wouldn't win it because she had won the singles 2 years in a row. But I sort of thought, well, Gwyneth would since she was right there. But anyway, it was a surprise, and it's something that I remember, that for what it was worth, the different qualities you're supposed to have. So that was my junior tennis. Then I was still in the juniors when I was at St. Kate's because I was a year ahead of myself in school, so I was able to go to the junior girls my freshman and sophomore year. And then and I had to work during the summer so I could go to St. Kate's, even though the tuition was only $300 a year. And you laugh at that, but it was expensive at that time for us. And I had to work, and then when I graduated from college in '56 there, I didn't play in any women's tournaments. But then in '57, the Northwest Tennis Association, they asked if they would sponsor me and pay my expenses to play in the women's tournaments, and I thought, well, why not? So I did. I went in '57 was the first year, and that year I ended up being ranked number 7th in the United States in singles, and I played with a girl from California. We got to the semifinals of the U.S. Doubles, and then in '58, that was my best year in tennis. That was the year that I got to the semifinals of the U.S. singles. First round, I beat my old doubles partner, Janet Hops, who had been out with an injury. She was seeded 5th. In that year, in '58, I was not seeded. Tennis back then was a lot of politics, and the Californians, and why I wasn't seeded, I don't know, because I had a good year during that summer of '58 too. So I had to play Janet the first round. She was seeded 5. Then the second round, I had to play the U.S. girls champion, who was from Ohio, and I beat her. In the third and fourth round, I don't quite remember. I don't know who I played. And then in the quarterfinals, I played the number 2 seed, Dorothy Head Node, and I beat her pretty easily. It was 2 and 3. And then I got to the semifinals, which I never expected either, and I lost to my doubles partner there. I think it was 7-5, 6-2. And then we had won. That's the year we beat Althea Gibson and Maria Bueno, and we were unseeded. I had to play with Darlene, or she had to play with me too, is because my doubles partner Janet had a back injury and wasn't around. I was playing somebody different every week, and Darlene would normally be playing over at Wimbledon with Althea Gibson. They had won the doubles, the Wimbledon doubles the year before, and Darlene was ranked like 2 or 3 in the country and the world. But that year, Darlene was working at a camp out in Boston or near there because she had to pay for her tuition. And so we met, and she said, who are you playing with? I said, I don't have anybody, and she didn't either. And so that's how we got going. And however, we were unseeded, and so we had to beat all the top players. And then to beat Althea, who was number 1 in singles, and Maria Bueno, who was number 2, and they were winners and runner-up in the singles, and they had won the Wimbledon doubles. And we started out rather poorly. We lost the first set, and I had lost my serve, and then we won the second set, and then it came down to the last set, and we were holding serve and so on. I think I had lost mine, but then Bueno lost hers, and it came down. I had 5-4, and I was serving, and I remember that game. You know, there's only a few games in my whole life that I remember, different shots. And it was 15 love, I was serving, then it was 15 all, then it was 30-15, and then it was 30 all, and then it was 40-30, and I was serving. And everybody played net at that time. They don't do that now, but Darlene was at net, and Bueno was at net. And I remember I served to Althea, and I came into net, and when you come into net, you don't never want to get caught in nose man, you want to get up here. And I got up there, and I mean, she hit the ball to me, and I volleyed with my backhand, and it was sort of in the center of the court. And I think Althea thought that Bueno was going to get it, and she didn't, and Althea couldn't get to it, and that was the end. And I remember, and then I didn't remember this either till the other day when I was looking through. But at that time, we were the youngest. Well, now we'd probably be the youngest ones ever to win the U.S. doubles title, and I was going to be 24 then, and Darlene was just a few months younger. So people always remember Wimbledon because that's the name, you know. But as far as my tennis, 1958 was the best year. And then when I went to Wimbledon, that was quite an experience. I was able to get off school, the principal there, a month early. There were no indoor courts, no nothing. So I couldn't practice at all. And I went to the French Championships, so that was on real slow clay. It wasn't like regular clay here. And I remember I had blisters all over, and the only time I could practice before I went, they had a indoor gym like over at the Wolt Chamberlain, the air station, and some of the fellows who played tennis here, we went over, they had a net up, and well, that was like playing on greased lightning, and I didn't do any good. So anyway, I played there, and then I played at some championships in England before Wimbledon and everything. And yes, it was nice to win Wimbledon and to be there and all the atmosphere, but we were expected to win, and so it wasn't as exciting. Although 2 weeks before Darlene didn't come over. I don't know when she came over because I played with some other people before. And Darlene and I did play this Christine Truman and Beverly Flights from the United States. Chris was from England the week or two before Wimbledon. We lost to them. And so anyway, when we played the finals, Darlene had played the singles and had lost to Maria Bueno there in 59. And then they had the men's doubles or singles or whatever, and then we played late. And Darlene was sort of down from all that, and we did manage. I think we lost the first set to the Christine Truman and Beverly Flights, and then we won the next two rather easily. But the thing about Wimbledon is I was more nervous because you had to walk so far and then you had to turn around and curtsy. You had to do this or that. And then if the royal box, if they went out for tea at 4 o'clock, you had to stop. I mean, it was all that rigmarole sort of, and it was very, Rod Laver described Wimbledon in center court. He said Wimbledon's the cathedral of tennis, but when Wimbledon, center court was a high altar. And back in those days, it was very, very quiet. It was almost like being in church. Nobody was yelling or screaming. Everybody was dressed up. I mean, you wouldn't come looking like this. Everybody wore skirts, and the men were wearing ties and this or that. It was very, very quiet, and they had a special standing room only in center court. There was people sitting up above, and then they had the standing room around, and then the lower ones. And people would be lined up the night before waiting to get into the standing room. And if they would leave, I don't know how they stood there long once they got in. If they leave, they lost their place. But it was just nuts over there how the people were so crazy about Wimbledon. But and that was a wonderful experience. But when looking back, that was not the highlight. The highlight probably about Wimbledon is just saying I got to play on center court about 5 or 6 times because my doubles partner from Australia, Bob Marks, was ranked 4th, and we got to play. So how many people get to play on center court? And then the other thing, when I look back, how many people can say they won on center court? But everything was quiet. When the Duchess of Kent talked to you, it was all quiet. They rolled out the carpet and that. And I don't know. I don't remember what she said, of course. And then that night, the final night, they had a big banquet downtown at some fancy hotel. And when we got near there, people were lined up. It reminded me of Hollywood, like when they have the Oscar Awards. People were lined up on the streets there and everything. It was sort of crazy to think, this for tennis? But they had a very nice dinner and all this and that, and they a dance, and it was very formal. You had to wear better clothes than just a dress, but a dressy dress is about what it amounted to. So that whole experience was nice too. And then there was a fellow from St. Paul here, and he was the airline representative for Northwest. In fact, his mother, his name is Bert Talbot, and anyway, his sister was that DeCourcy, who was a city councilwoman. But I known Bert anyway. He came up here to play tennis, so I always got him a ticket to every day, and his fiancee. And then the worst part was when I first met him, and we would go out and stuff when I wasn't playing tennis, he and his fiancée and that. And he made arrangements the day after Wimbledon on Sunday. He was going to pick me up to play doubles with some of his friends. And okay, the Wimbledon party lasted till I don't know how long. And then Fred Perry, whose clothes I wore, the make of them, he had a party after. And I crawled in about 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, and I thought, oh, that Bert's coming at 9 o'clock to pick me up to play tennis. Oh, my gosh. And then I did go to bed, and I was Catholic, and I went to church. I was a good girl, and I thought, oh, my gosh. And sure enough, he came at 9 and picked me up, and I thought, oh, I have to play tennis? Well, we only played about a set, thank heavens, but they probably thought, how did you win Wimbledon? Yeah. So anyway, that was the highlights. And then after too, I guess when I look back, that different halls of fame and so on that was all nice. But they're my memories, and I don't talk about them a whole lot to people. Like when I moved out to the senior place, well, they're all my age, and when I was playing tennis, there was a lot of tennis coverage in the St. Paul and Minneapolis paper because there was nothing else. And sometimes they'd recognize my name. And this one lady, I always say this old lady, and I'm old too, the same age probably. And she said, I said my name. She said, oh, that's a famous name. She said, oh, I know that name. I know that name. And then she said, well, were you famous? We're getting on the elevator. I said, well, I played tennis. She said, oh, now I know. So those are the highlights. And I guess the other highlight, the best thing too, is that I've had a healthy life.
Obviously, America is struggling through a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic right now. Meanwhile, we are seeing a long-postponed racial reckoning occurring over half a century on the heels of America's civil rights era. What gives you hope for the months and years ahead? What gives you pause?
Okay, I have a very good true story. And I first met Althea Gibson. As you probably know, she was the first African-American, first black person who was allowed to play in any tournaments. And the first time she got in was in 1952. And I think during the winter they had like a 2 or 3 hour show about her on TPC or whatever. And I knew most of the things about her anyway. But anyway, in 1952, and I did not know her then, that was the first year that she was allowed to play at the U.S. Championships at Westside Tennis Club. And believe it or not, she was not allowed to come into the clubhouse, she was just not allowed to do that. Now you can imagine that. I mean, and then she turned out, she played there in 1952. She played Louise Bruff, who was the number 1 or 2 players, and they were playing in center court and or the the center court, and a terrible storm came and rain, and some of the statues were knocked down and that. And the next day, usually, if you have to continue your match, they put you back on the center court. Well, they didn't do that to her. They put her on another court, and then eventually Louise Bruff beat her. Okay, so the first time I met Althea was in 1957, and it was mainly with Mrs. Whiteman, because Mrs. Whiteman put up some of the players that were playing in the doubles and so on and so forth. And I had the privilege really of playing Althea a couple of times in singles, and she beat me both times. I think I got a few games each set. And Althea, her behavior on and off the court was impeccable. And when I look back and think, here, a world champion, she was 1 and 2, number 1 in the whole world, and number 1 in doubles a number of times, and she was treated just horrible. And when I saw that, I was thinking too, it wasn't Arthur Ashe was a great gentleman too. Don't get me wrong or anything like that. He's done a lot for tennis. But if you really want to go back, it wasn't Arthur Ashe who brought all the black people into the tennis world. It was Althea Gibson. She set the tone. If they had not allowed her in, and I wonder if she had not been a world champion, if she had just been somebody who was ranked 7th, 8th, or whatever, but she was a world champion. And imagine, they didn't let her in, and it wasn't because, and I found out it wasn't because she was black. All these fancy clubs, we played at very, very fancy clubs out in the East. They all were ritzy clubs. They were afraid, not about her, but the black people would come to watch tennis. Well, they weren't interested in women's tennis or even men's tennis. Maybe a few came, and that was their big objection, you know. And I was thinking that with all this Black Lives Matter and so on and so forth, why at the stadium now where they play the championships, they have a statue of Arthur Ashe, which is fine, and Billie Jean King, but it wasn't Arthur Ashe who broke the ice. It was Althea Gibson, and her behavior was absolutely perfect, both on and off the course. And I remember when Darlene and I beat Althea and Maria Bueno, we had to play on Saturday because Althea was a singer and she was going to be on the Ed Sullivan Show. And Darlene had made arrangements for her to drive us down to New York, and she had a bigger car, and so she drove us down. Well, that wasn't so easy for her either. We're both there, and we had just beaten her, and so on and so forth. But she was a great lady, and the only reason she quit, I guess, after 58 there, is because she had run out of money, and this doctor, Dennis, who was sort of supporting her, she needed money to go on. She didn't have anybody to support her, and then she took up golf. And I mean, she was a good golfer, but when you're competing against professionals and that, and she lived sort of an impoverished life after that. And I've just wondered through all this, why isn't somebody like that given recognition? She never misbehaved, never. And nowadays we have other players who, without mentioning names, but who are not very nice on the course when they swear and holler at the umpires and referees and so on and so forth. Nobody ever did that back when I was playing, men or women. It was after McEnroe and that whole group. But I mean, she was impeccable, and she's never received that recognition. If it wasn't for her, who knows what would happen. I'll tell you one little quick story too. That morning that we were supposed to play her, she and Darlene wasn't staying at Mrs. Whiteman because I don't know if she was staying wherever she was wherever she was like counselor. And we came down to breakfast, and Althea and I were having breakfast, and she was pouring honey into her tea or whatever she was drinking. And I said, "What's that for?" And she said, "You'll find out on the court."
Thank you both very much.
Okay. That was easy to do.